Hi guys, Mrs. Joseph here. We are going to start talking about the genres of science fiction and fantasy. And I'm really excited to get started on this work with you all. So let's take a look at the difference between the two and how they're similar as well. Okay, so just some basic information to let you know what the difference is. At first, they can seem actually quite a bit alike, and they do have some similarities. But science fiction usually takes place in the future, sometimes in a dystopian society, usually in a society that has more advanced technology. But in fantasy, it's usually very much a fantasy realm, mythical creatures, magic, supernatural powers. And although sometimes there's some similarities, what's really obvious is how they're different. So you kind of want to keep in mind those differences that separate the two. And it has a lot to do with this idea of plausibility. Could this really happen? And I know the, the answer for both is no, neither of it really could, but actually, science fiction, it kind of could because it extrapolates or draws conclusions from the modern world in science fiction. It tends to have science in it, hence the title science fiction. Um, but it may take some of the science in our present day world and kind of predict what could happen. Excuse me. And how it could develop and how it could become. And that is that idea of science fiction. Whereas fantasy is very much supernatural. It couldn't happen in our current world. There's no link to our world today. Magic. And it may seem like it's real, it's believable, but the reality is just not there. So it dwells in the impossible. I think that's kind of poetically worded. Whereas science fiction is kind of also referred to sometimes as speculative fiction because it takes that idea of some of the science and what if this happened. So kind of keep that in mind when we're looking at fantasy and sci-fi. And that might help you with Mr. Was and Miss Peregrine as well as the short stories we're going to start today. Here's a little bit more information. When it comes to science fiction, and that's where we will start, Ray Bradbury is one of my favorite authors of short stories and novels. You'll read this Fahrenheit 451 in eighth grade, but we're reading some short stories of his, another one today. Anne McCaffrey writes both science fiction and sometimes more fantasy. The author of I, Robot is a famous sci-fi, as well as like Star Wars and Star Trek and Dune. So there are two elements that are pretty strong in science fiction. One's the pretty obvious one, and that's science. But what it does, it really can vary how the science is incorporated. It can be very different depending on the story. But usually it's in the visual aesthetic or the setting and the mood. That's where the science falls in. For example, this idea of, and it's a really cool subgenre, the steampunk subgenre, um, very different aesthetic. You can, excuse me, kind of see it and see the difference, but it's usually because it's in a pre industrialized world, that steampunk type of science fiction. Matter of fact, I'll maybe throw an example here on this slide so you can look at it closer after the video on the slideshow. But it just really depends where an author will take the science. It can really look different depending on the stories, but it's always present in some way, shape, or form. Right now, with Mr. Was, we're looking at time travel. Today's short story, it will be a different form than that, and we'll talk about that. There's also usually a technology element that explores really advanced technologies, travel, time travel, the future, futuristic places. Maybe people are living on different planets, and that's a big part of sci-fi. Those different technologies. Sometimes they cause problems. The robots will invade or attack a society, and so the conflicts can be a problem. Um, or the technology, sorry, can be a problem and a conflict. So today, in Google Classroom, assigned to you is this short story. It's called The Veld by Ray Bradbury, and the Veld is a type of plane in Africa. Just the land. You may want to Google it real quick, but here's a little picture from the book. And I want you to take some notes. It can be in your paper notebook or it can be the digital version in Google Classroom. You might notice the Google Classroom looks a little bit different today. I hope it will help you. 4 boxes would work really well, and I would suggest, um, well, I'm going to tell you that two things you need to note are techniques and goals. Those could be 2 of your 4 boxes, or if you're going to use a different format, just make sure you cover those 2 topics. I would suggest also maybe mapping something you haven't written about in a while. I thought of part to whole because as I was reading this story, there were some small parts of the story that I thought were really important to the big picture. That kind of thinking really helped me. And then you could just choose a fourth area to investigate. Let's do a quick review of part to whole. Maybe this will inspire you to do this technique. Um, what basically you do with part to whole is you look at a small part of the text, usually a sentence. If you're reading a whole book, it could be a chapter, it could be a page, it could be a scene, and you are thinking about how that small part really fits into the larger part or the whole story or the whole book. Why is it there? Why is it at this point in the story that's happening, this sentence or this scene? Here's an example from Harry Potter. This is fantasy, but it'll give you an idea. The sorting hat scene in the Harry Potter book, the first one, or the movie, if you think about that scene and think about how's it important to the whole book? What does it reveal? Does it reveal something about theme? Does it reveal something about character? Does it even reveal maybe something about conflict? Maybe even think of it this way. What if that scene weren't a part of the movie or it wasn't part of the book? Well, how would that change things? And you may remember some of this work that we've done before. These still apply to the standards that we teach in 7th grade, looking at those, taking apart those parts and looking at them very, very closely, that analysis work, and then comparing it to the big picture. So hopefully you'll be inspired maybe to take some notes on this today. So again, in Google Classroom, I've assigned the story to you. I want you to start reading today. And you can finish reading tomorrow. You'll have about 20 minutes while I'm meeting with reading groups. If that's not going to be enough time, you could always work on a little bit Tuesday for homework, or during Trojan time Wednesday morning a little bit. And I will see you on Wednesday. Don't forget Tuesday, no school. Take care, guys. Bye bye.